Okay. Hi, everybody. Just welcome to class. We're going to do a bit of a review today just on our Mahamudra, our Emptiness of the Mind material. So I'm just going to start with Blessing of the Heart Sutra here. Okay. And take it from here. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Homage to perfection, wisdom, the Blessed Mother. Thus I have heard at one time the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajgir in Mass Walter's Mountain, together the great assembly of monks and nuns, a great assembly of bodhisattvas. That time the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. That time also Skriva Valakshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, was looking perfectly the price of profound perfection of wisdom, looking perfectly also the five agras being empty inherent existence. Then through the power of Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to Skriva Valakshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and Skriva Valakshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, replied to Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, whatever son or daughter of the lineage wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection of wisdom should look perfectly like this. Subsequently, looking perfectly and correctly also at the five agras being empty of inherent existence. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is none other than form, and form is none other than emptiness. Likewise, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, this all phenomena are emptiness, having no characteristics. They're not produced and do not cease. They have no defilement, no separation from defilement. They have no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, and no consciousness. There's no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body mentality, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tactile object, no phenomenon. There's no I element, so forth, up to no mentality element, also up to no element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so forth, up to no aging and death, no exhaustion of aging and death. Likewise, there's no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no exalted awareness, no attainment, also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds have no obstructions and no fear. Passing utterly beyond perversity, they attain the final nirvana. Also, all Buddhas reside perfectly in the three times, having relied upon the perfection of wisdom, became manifest, complete Buddhas in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the equal and the unequaled mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, since it's not false, should be known as the truth. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is proclaimed, Tayata Gada Gada Paragata Parasamgati Bodhisoha. Shariputra, bodhisattva, great beings should train the profound perfection of wisdom like this. Then the Blessed One arose in that concentration and said to Svarvalakshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, that he'd spoken well. Good, O son, and just like that. Since it's like that, just as you have revealed, in that way the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra, Svarvalakshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, the entire circle of disciples, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, demigods, and spirits, were delighted and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One. Okay, so we'll just take refuge in bodhicitta, generate bodhicitta from our hearts here, just sort of in a simple way, just visualizing all holy beings, Buddha Shakyamuni, and all of our gurus in front of us. And we go, I and all sentient beings into each even enlightenment, go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I and all sentient beings to each even enlightenment, go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I and all sentient beings to each even enlightenment, go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Again, taking refuge in Buddha as a teacher, teaching the entire path of enlightenment, to see emptiness directly. The Dharma being the path of seeing how to sort of see emptiness directly as a way of liberating us from our suffering. And the Sangha being our whole community helping us along the way, that we all self-realize. Our hearts, through the virtues we collect by giving other perfections, may we become a Buddha for the benefit of all. Through the virtues we collect by giving other perfections, may we become a Buddha for the benefit of all. Through the virtues we collect by giving and other perfections, may we become Buddha for the benefit of all. And just at our hearts, generating sort of a great compassion and a superior intention that whatever we do in our life, we'll just keep walking this path to enlightenment in order to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. So not just ourselves, but all beings. That we become Buddha, that we be able to show all sentient beings how they can self-actualize as Buddha as well. Okay, so there we go. And just a little prayer session there. And now just to go over a few things, if you'd like, just a few questions just on Mahamudra, and in particular, sort of the more Vipassana sort of teachings on Mahamudra, emptiness in the mind that been going over. So do you have any questions or little statements or stuff you'd like to add here? What do you think?
Matthew?
Yeah.
You went over, well, your last class, over that you sent us, went over the 5 different ways of looking at all of this. And I just I'm still not, it's hard to differentiate them for me. Like each one makes sense by itself, but I just wanted
to. That's good. Like I'm sure it's really hard, Marsha. Like this is the whole thing, is that we're not, monks in 19th century Tibet, like training for a geshe degree, studying this stuff and running around. And, it's almost like being in university, writing papers and debating and doing your thesis defense against other professors and stuff. Like it's a far cry. And this is why in some ways, when you do this kind of traditional study of emptiness in sort of context of Tibetan Buddhism, particularly the Gelugpa tradition, certain maybe a little more critical, cynical people might say, well, what's this got to do with meditating? Like I see in my mind's eye Buddha and these monks meditating in the forest, and then I see people like you running around reading books and fighting on different views of emptiness. Like how does this all fit together? I didn't sign up for a philosophy class in university. I just want to be a Buddhist. I want release from suffering. That's why I'm doing Buddhism, as a form of, therapy for myself or whatever, spiritual realization. Why do I have to worry about all these different schools of emptiness and what they care? I don't care what a lot of these guys say. So in a lot of ways, that might be a little bit of a cartoon critique on one level, but in a lot of ways it's fair. I mean, this is, and we have to remember that these 4 main schools of emptiness is that traditionally put kind of in classical, kind of like medieval or whatever you want to call classical Indian Buddhist scholarship, that you're looking at about 1,500 years of it after Buddha passed into parinirvana. So it's the same thing of, you've got, in the Christian world, you've got Jesus teaching his disciples, and it's almost like this wonderful spiritual teacher, almost kind of like a hippie, and how to be a good person. And then go 100 years, 1,000 years into the future in medieval Europe, and you have all these monks debating St. Augustine, St. Aquinas on, let's say, like a topic that I've always found, angelic cognition. How do angels know material things when they're immaterial? If they're immaterial, like Casper the Ghost, where they can pass through walls, how can their mind even touch a material thing? And then you start to think, go back in time and tell Jesus, hey, guess what? Your followers 1,000 years from now are going to be spending their time doing this. And he's going to like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? So, on a cartoon level, it's kind of like that. Like, are we wasting our time doing this? And of course, it's very well put, Buddha himself never posited these positions in a systematic way. So he never, in 50 years of teaching, where he's going through India and Nepal and stuff, said, okay, today we're studying the Vaibhashika system of, Abhidharma system of emptiness, and tomorrow we're going to look at mind only. There weren't even these terms. It would be completely ridiculous and irrelevant to think that that's kind of how Buddha taught these things. These sort of views arrived centuries later. And like I said, what was interesting is that you had people like Nagarjuna and Asanga being the 2 big famous saints and philosophers, and people that sort of renovated, I guess you could say, Mahayana Buddhism, over 500 years after Buddha died. What they did is basically, okay, looking at all the sutras, Buddha says these different aphorisms and words and teachings. Can we put them together in kind of like a theme or like a certain view or paradigm that he's talking about? So we'll see this in 2 courses from now on Tsongkhapa's Essence of True Eloquence, that we talk about Buddha, and this is a big one, turning the wheel of Dharma 3 times. So they say in the 50 years, and that's a long time. I mean, you're looking at our lamas like Zasep Rinpoche and so forth, and Solon Dalai Lama and so forth. they're teaching, you see how they teach 24/7. They're always giving talks and answering emails and meeting with people. So Buddha did the same thing, but even on a bigger scale for 50 years. So no one, you had all the arhats and everyone remembering things and writing it down later, but be the equivalent. What would it be like if you followed him around and recorded, with videos or whatever? He was uploading podcasts all the time. I mean, just imagine the amount of material Buddha Shakyamuni himself would have. That's why there's so many sutras, and he's teaching because he's an enlightened being on different levels. So he's teaching more of the Hinayana path for people. He's teaching the Mahayana path. And then psychically, he's teaching all the tantras. So everyone's in the audience listening to him talk on the loving kindness, theme. And then there's someone in the back who's like, oh my God, and sees him as Vajradhara Samantabhadra giving all these Dzogchen teachings or something, right? Like and then he's teaching in different realms, different parallel universes, teaching to different spirit beings and so forth. So it's amazing. But anyway, they said, in the context of his whole life, they sort of break it into 3 periods. So the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, they say, is all this sort of foundational teachings he gave at Sarnath outside of Varanasi, which of course you can go there. That's his first teaching to his first 5 disciples on the 4 noble truths or 4 Arya truths. So the point is, in that period of his life, they always say his view on emptiness corresponds more with the Vaibhashika and even some of the Sautrantika system, in the sense that he said that things are real, but they're always changing, right? So this is the big thing at that. And the point is that even looking at the emptiness of self, you look at your 5 aggregates and you can't find a true, lasting, independent soul or mind or super self or higher self or whatever. There's just sort of 5 components of yourself that are all interrelated, that are always changing. So this is the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. But he's very clear at that time when he's teaching, kind of like you might have been 35 years old or something. He's not saying things don't exist. It's just that the point is they don't exist in the way you think they do. They're always changing. You think they don't, especially with yourself. That's why you're suffering. So, you can look at this like Thich Nhat Hanh's masterwork. I love that old path, White Clouds, where it's Buddha's life, and it's amazing. And you see these first 5 disciples, you see the kinds of teachings that Buddha was giving at the time. And this is all perfectly preserved in Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia. I mean, you can study this, all the sutras in the Dharmapada. You can study even the Abhidharma teachings with the 3 baskets of, you've got Sila ethics, you've got shamatha, or, all the meditation and sutric teachings. And then you have Abhidharma, which is Buddha, and then some of Buddha's students teaching on these issues, on emptiness, on the mind, Buddhist psychology, like Lorig and so forth. But, they don't even call it emptiness at this point. I mean, they're just calling it non-self. Phenomena have non-self. They're impermanent. There's all these things, and then, like in Vaibhash, they say it's like everything's like atoms coming together and making like new little combinations, and then they come apart. The phenomena are like mixtures, this and that. But the point is, you think they're stable and unchanging and independent of you, but they're not. So that's the first turning wheel of Dharma. Then later on in his life, as we remember, more in the context of Mahayana teachings, he's teaching at Rajgir, Vulture's Peak Mountain in Bihar State, and then he gives, the Prajnaparamita teachings. So they call this the second turning of the wheel of Dharma in this point in his life. And this is where everything is emptiness. Phenomena do not exist inherently. So this is quite different. So all of a sudden, if you were a student from him from the beginning, you're like, well, wait a minute, you're saying things do exist, they're just changing. Now you're saying things don't exist. What? Well, I don't understand that. Yeah, well, and so then he gives all the massive Prajnaparamita teachings, of which the Heart Sutra is sort of the best example. Everything's kind of, we just recited that today, kind of contained in that one. So this is where you study. What's interesting is Nagarjuna's whole middle way philosophy comes from this period. So Nagarjuna, 500 years later, is like, well, all the sutras Buddha gave in this part of his life seem to me the most powerful, because the point is, it's a negative critique. If he's telling you that everything changes, how is it that everything changes? What does it mean if everything changes. And of course, everything is non-self, means it's empty, means everything is a dependent arising. It's changing because it's depending on different causal conditions that are not itself. So anyway, that's the second period. So that's why Nagarjuna develops his whole philosophy into this sort of negative critique of metaphysics, of anything. Anytime you try and hold on to something, I'm going to show that it slips out of your fingers by being related to something else. And that we can never posit anything as a position, because we're making an essentialist claim. We're claiming that this exists independent of everything else. So this is Nagarjuna's kind of famous negative critiques, kind of like negative dialectics, almost like the Frankfurt School or whatever. And, the negative dialectics of the middle way. Now then, at the end of Buddhist life, the last number of years, he starts teaching another view of emptiness, right? So this is, he's teaching at Vasali, and this is where he starts teaching what's later known as the mind only, or Chittamantra Yogacara teachings on emptiness. Whereas this point, he's saying that everything is mind. Mind's nature is luminosity. So again, this is different. So in other words, things exist now, but as mind. So this is weird, isn't it? So first he's saying things exist, they're just changing. Then he says don't exist. Now he's saying they do exist again, but they don't exist outside my mind. They're actually a part of my mind. So these three, so you see after Buddha passes into parinirvana, you have all students and they're like, okay, which one's right? Which period? And so you have people, a lot of people, well, the last one's right because it's a progression in his life. Why would he give you the wrong view before he dies? Like all the Theravada people say the first view is the right view and the last two are wrong. And then other students are like, well, why would he do that? Why would he? That doesn't make sense. Like, and then you have you'll see in our Galupa tradition, we believe the second period is the correct view. So you see that depends which, they're all right. They're all right relatively. They all fit together. But where's the emphasis? So we're going to see in Tsongkhapa's book, Essence of True Eloquence, it's called Art of Interpretation. So he's looking precisely at this problem. And his problem is, you will see when we study it, is just like the Bible. How do I know when Buddha's being literal? How do I know when he's giving us all these self-contradictory teachings? How do I know which one to believe? How do I know when he's being serious and saying, no, this is what I really mean? And how do I know when he's just mixing it up a little bit, giving a relative truth, maybe telling, not a lie, but you know what I mean, like kind of whatever, fudging things a little bit or whatever, for his audience to help them understand. And we'll see that the answer that Tsongkhapa comes up with, and it's unbelievably sublime, based on the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, which we'll see. And that's why His Holiness Dalai Lama says, I always carry kind of a leather-bound copy, so to speak. I don't think it's probably like a petriform, but anyway, of Tsongkhapa's book on me at all times as a reminder. Okay, so I'll give it away, like just because I want you to think about it, and we got a little while. But Tsongkhapa says the only thing, like basically, what's figurative or metaphorical or whatever, what's figurative and what's literal in Buddhism. Basically, the only thing we can take literally is when Buddha says everything is empty, which means if that's the case, then the only thing we can take literally is that everything's figurative, right? So we'll see why that's the case. Now, why is that important? Because you get the big Zen thing of having to let go of everything, including Buddhism itself. And that's why Buddhism, that's why as someone, the big philosophy geek like me, I've always found Buddhism to be the most unbelievable sort of life philosophy, because it's the only one that says basically, don't believe me, figure it out yourself. In other words, the crucial moment in Buddhism is letting go of Buddhism itself, which I don't want to say no other religion, maybe there is another religion out there, but you see most other religions or life philosophies precisely don't do that. They tell you to let go of everything else except this one little piece. That's the important piece. You know, God or the true self or true reality or the secret teaching or the secret mantra. Everything else is a lie except this one little thing you have to remember. What you see with Buddhism is everything goes. Why? To liberate you, to liberate you. So Buddha, during his life, he would always say, I teach liberation from suffering. So Buddhism, just like Atisha says, Buddha's a doctor, Dharma's the medicine, all the Sangha are the nurses and the EMTs and everyone in the hospital room. Buddhism is only a therapeutic methodology. It's only to solve suffering. That's it. So it's not philosophy, it's not religion, it's not metaphysics. And so when geeks like me were in the audience with Buddha, he gives a teaching, excuse me, Buddha, yeah, you over there in the second row, you said, I just want you, like, I'm just getting clear on this, right? You said that everything is blah, 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 and like, how does the mind, blah, 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 and whatever, me being me. And then what they always say, Buddha's silence, and all these big issues where people try and corner him, all the sort of scholars and geeks and Brahmins and all the kind of technical academic people the day that would come see these public talks with Buddha. And they'd always want to say, okay, so what's the soul? What's the mind? Is there life after death? Is there metaphysics? What's the status of being qua being? If everything is changing, what is being? Blah, blah, blah. And what Buddha, the story, the answer to this. What Buddha often would do is just not say anything. And people, you're not answering my question. What are you talking about? We know you're like this. And what Buddha would always say, just wait a moment till everyone stops yelling. And then he would just be like this. And he'd say, I'm only teaching this to liberate you from suffering. That's it. This isn't philosophy. It's not politics. We're not making a theory of the world. There's only one reason I'm telling you any of this, whether it's simple, watch your breath, or detailed explanations of emptiness. There's one reason only: to liberate you from yourself, your own self-cherishing mind that is causing you suffering. So this isn't a philosophy class. So it's important to realize that. So these 4 schools of emptiness come way later after Buddha's gone, trying to codify all these sort of different views on emptiness that Buddha gives out. And there's 4 major ones. And the 2 biggest ones in the world, really, because Mahayana Buddhism is probably the biggest one, were, of course, the mind-only school and the Madhyamika school. And they're quite different. Like, basically, one's saying everything is mind, one's saying everything's emptiness, everything's void. So one's a positive view and one's a negative view. So at the time when Atisha came to Tibet in the 10th century, what he was famous for doing is combining these 2. Is he was able to show that Buddhism is a positive thing of positive qualities, practicing compassion, generating all these virtues, seeing how the mind works in your Buddha nature, but at the same time showing that everything is empty, everything's just posited as a concept or as a collection of words. And so that's why he was famous. So people would oftentimes get confused, and he was able to show the unity of these things, that it's kind of like, is the glass of water half empty or half full? Well, I can talk about it being half full, and I can talk about it being half empty. And again, why? Therapeutically, to release you from suffering. So Tsongkhapa, 400 years later, whatever, he follows Atisha's model, uses all that stuff, but then also shows the unity of Sutra and Tantra. Is that if we understand Atisha's model, we can show how Sutra and Tantra, all the sort of open teachings of Buddhism and all the secret, esoteric, mystical, kind of occult Qigong teachings go together, and they're the same thing as well. And that's kind of the crowning achievement of the Gelugpa tradition. So anyway, how we're positive, what I liked about Geshe Michael Roach's 6 Flavors of Emptiness, when I found out about it all those years ago, is that he takes these 4 views on emptiness and puts them in a way aphoristically as a way of helping you in your day-to-day life. So the point of these 4 schools of emptiness, or 6 flavors of emptiness, 4 schools, 6 flavors, is that all of them are true, relatively speaking. They all work, they're all helpful, but like what I want to show is that they're almost moving dialectically. Like the sort of initial Vaibhashika position on emptiness is preserved, but transcended by the final Madhyamika Prasangika view. So the point is the Prasangika view, which we need to understand to be able to do Tantra, combines all the other views within it. But in some ways, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more simple, and it's a lot more direct. Right? So what I like is, if you're doing your Geshe degree, they teach you this serially. So you do all the logic, pramana stuff for years, where you're doing Sautrantika stuff, and oh my God, what's the difference between, how to understand subject, predicate logic, how to understand mindedness objects, blah, blah, blah. It's all these years. And when you study this, it's really, really difficult. It's beyond me, most of it, to be honest. I mean, it's very, very difficult. And then you get into doing all the really difficult mind-only school. And at the very end of it, the last courses, they say, okay, here's the real view on emptiness. Everything's just projected by your mind as a label and base, just as labels, just as words and concepts. And that's so easy. And you're like, what? Why didn't you tell me this in my first, I did 20 years of my geshe. Why didn't you just tell me this in the first semester? Like, I just study all this stuff, all the hard stuff. And then I see the answer is way easier than that. But that's the whole point. Like, what I always like is where they structure it that way. It kind of allows you to let go of all that systematic metaphysical philosophy, and it frees your mind, and you're ready to do Tantra. And when you go into 3-year retreat, you no longer have any intellectual confusions or hangups or worries or doubts. Like when you're in retreat, you see everything's just imputed by the mind by name, they call name alone, words and concepts. So you won't be in retreat going, wait a minute, oh my, I'm going to quit my 3-year retreat because I've just, valid cognitions drive me crazy. I have to get the answer to that. You're beyond those kinds of confusions or beyond those kinds of doubts at that point, which is amazing. So it has liberated your mind. But you can see like, even if you look at the mind-only school, how helpful that is. Like, even just seeing that everything is your mind. Like, even just on a really cartoon, coarse, vulgar way, that helps. So when I'm fighting with people, having like the family dinner at Christmas where everyone's fighting, Raul, I can't believe my mom said that. I really realized that I hate my sister and why did I come here? But whatever, right? But if you're at that point where you're like, actually, this isn't separate from me. This is my movie. This is me. Like, there's only so much I can get angry about if it's just on my mind, right? So that alone, again, and what's important with that is it liberates you from suffering. It's not a philosophy position. This is a therapy to help you suffer less, right? Is that I've gone on and like pontificate for half an hour? Like, does this? What do you think, Marcia? Is that helpful? Like what I just said, or like?
Yes, it's wonderful. And I have been so grateful to be able to understand more and how many ways there are to look at it, and how incredibly complex at one level it is, and at another level, I know that there's a very simple place, finally, and to be able to have all this intellectual interaction and with ideas. This has been incredibly helpful because it makes me understand that you don't have to worry about it. It's going to happen. Like you're going to, it's just going to happen. And all of this, instead of being confusing and overwhelming, I just take each one and look at it and then just keep on going. I guess what I'm saying is I'm very much calmer about it. There's no those sense that I must understand this to be, to be doing this properly.
That's the fabulous way of what you're saying, a fabulous way of looking at it. So that is like, remember, we're not getting your geshe degree. You don't have to write defend a doctorate thesis for this. But I'm just saying, like, maybe in the old days you want to be some monk and run around, become a Kempo or a geshe, then you have to worry about this stuff. We're not. We're just like regular Joe Blow practitioners here, and what we're trying to be, our friends here, like, as being good yogis and yoginis, we're in a very real way under Rinpoche's spiritual guidance and directorship. We're trying to get enlightened as soon as we can, whether it's this life, next life, or whatever. So we're trying to realize emptiness directly in a very practical, spiritual way in our own lives. So on one level, these things kind of don't matter, right? But in one ways they do matter, because the point is we're trying to figure out what emptiness is, So we have a correct understanding. So it directly helps our practical application of the teachings in our life. In particular, that like our real meditation when we're meditating on emptiness. Like my first teacher used to quote his teacher, right? Again, Kelsey Tarchin, I can't remember which one told him this, but he had all these very high lamas as his teachers. But he said, many people meditate on emptiness, very few have the correct object. In other words, as you know, emptiness or voidness is one of these words like wellness, spirituality, God, higher self, where everyone kind of knows what it means. Like I know, like one philosopher always says, you know, you're approaching an ideological moment where you're going into your blind spot. Like everyone's using all these words, but no one knows what they mean. Like, I know what you mean, man. Like everything's one, man. But it's just like when you actually take that kind of blurry fog and try and meditate on it, what you see is like, what am I meditating? I have no idea what I'm meditating on. Where you see what I love about Buddhism is something like emptiness or voidness. It isn't some woolly metaphysical woo-woo concept. It's a very specific object that you're meditating on. It's a very delineated, defined, clear thing, which is great. I mean, it's almost like whatever, like, you know, like I always should hold up my mala. I mean, it's just like the brown sandalwood mala. Like, it's just, look at this. I mean, it's not something, you know, that, so in a lot of ways it is subtle and complicated when you have to study it. It's not something obvious, which is why they call it a hidden object. It's not like, okay, what's at the, you know, what's at the tip of your nose? But at the same time, they don't call it a very hidden object like karma, where you're just not going to get it. You're not going to understand all the different karmic facets of existence till you get enlightened. So it's kind of good that way. So we're trying to be yogis and yoginis and just meditate on these things. So that's all that matters. So we take what's most helpful and most relevant to our meditation, and that's what you use. And you leave all the philosophy and the debates and the fighting and yelling at each other for the people who like doing it. And that's why, like Rinpoche always said when he was in Thailand, they asked him, do you want to be city monk or do you want to be jungle monk? And he said, I want to be jungle monk, because if I'm city monk at the big temples in Bangkok, which we all love, they're amazing. What do I do as city monk? Well, I'm meditating and studying, but also, you know, talking to tourists coming in and dealing with government people that want this sutra read for this and that. And then all the big abbots come and it's like national holidays and whatever. Whereas if I'm jungle monk, I'm just meditating on emptiness in the jungle. I'm trying to get enlightened. So it's the same thing where they say in Tibetan Buddhism, are you a yogi or are you some kind of scholar monk, right? Or a scholar nun? And in the Gelugpa tradition, we want to mix both. We want to be a good scholar, but also, most of all, we want to be a good yogi. But we know what happened in the past. We don't have to be too narrow-minded about it. In the Gelugpa tradition, just like any religion, you have a lot of people that just want to get their Geshe degree so they can be like me, run around being some intellectual, or get a government job with the Ganden Potala government in Lhasa or whatever, or I'm publishing my next paper, or like I've, you know, met a number of different lamas like that were in Tibet at that time, and they'd meet all sorts of people that be studying this stuff and then never meditating because they just want to write another book on emptiness. And then they're like, shouldn't we actually be trying to get enlightened with this stuff? Like, is it? And then you sort of, is just like, you know, take Jesus, you know, ahead in time. It's just like, okay, like, protect me, Lord, from your followers. Like, this is kind of what your religion became, right? You know, how ashamed are you? It'd be the same thing that if you took, you know, Buddha and just said it's all people running around trying to get their Geshe degree, and he'd be like, no, I just want you to meditate on emptiness to get enlightened, to relieve your suffering, not to write another book. So I've got like lovely friends who even say that to me, Matthew, please write a book on emptiness. I'm like, no, there's enough books on emptiness. I read them. They're wonderful. I don't have to write another one. I just want to try and meditate on this to get enlightened. So Buddha himself said, he says, for scholars, I do all this advanced stuff. But then he says, for yogis and yoginis, I teach tenets. So that's what's interesting. So there's a whole part of the Gelugpa curriculum it's called tenet theory, or tenets. And what's interesting is that they distill all of these vast talks on emptiness, or these, like even these 4 schools, into these tiny, pithy, one-page things, almost like aphorisms on what they believe. And so in particular, you do that for the Prasangika thing. You distill everything down to kind of one page. And this helps you when you're in retreat. So if you're running into doubts, you grab your little fortune cookie here and you wait a minute, everything is name alone. Aha, then you go back to meditating. So it's kind of interesting Buddha said that. And I think that that's really great. So we can use these teachings as tenets, like little flashpoints, little cue cards, little list on your phone that you have where it's like, okay, this is helpful. What Mind Only School says this is helpful, it's on here. So when I'm in my long retreat and some weird confusion's coming up, I look at it as a yogi or yogini, right? Not as some intellectual person, right? Anyway, does that sound okay? Or
Yeah.
okay, so in other words, focus on tennis, Marsha, like in a sense that that's what you're working at. You're a yogini meditating. You're not some philosopher person. So you take everything down to a fortune cookie level and what's helpful, and you remember that. So when you're meditating or in retreat, that's what you apply when you get confusions. Like you come back, wait a minute, this is what I have to think or what I have to see, or this is kind of my view, right? What do you think, Patricia? You're going to say something. So
yeah. Well, actually, kind of now just getting on to, when we're on the cushion.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm asking about philosophy here, but so the mind is the object, right? So observing the mind. One of the things I'll do when I find myself, okay, like I'm just kind of all over, right? My field of merit is a real point of grounding me. It's very stabilizing. Not even so much visually, conceptually, because, I don't always see the whole thing, right? I'll see a few bits and I'll know a few bits, but it stabilizes me, if that makes sense.
Of course, it's meant to, yeah.
Okay, so then I'll go back to the best I can with, observing the mind, right? But I will, in a sit, I will have to go back and forth, depending on the day, depending on what's going on, right? But is that still Mahamudra? I mean, if I'm going, and maybe this is kind of like using it as a tenant, that's my point where I stabilize and I can go back. I don't know. What do you think?
It's good. Like, remember, we start with stabilizing. Like, if you're actually, let's apply this to like practical Mahamudra now, which is meditating on the mind. So we start out, as you know, just like in the Glupa Drishyan Rinpoche's wonderful Mahamudra book, Geshe Rabin's book, there's a whole bunch of them. You always start, with, almost like Jorcho Refuge and Bodhicitta. You do all the preliminaries. You even do some of the neutral stuff, and then you ask for blessings from the lineage gurus. So that's the refuge field that you have. Now, we know that using your tenets from the Prasangika system, that everything is labeled by the mind by name alone. So whatever is designated conceptually exists. So the good thing about that is if I'm designating Buddhas conceptually in front of me, they exist just like me. So they're really there. So that's amazing. So it's not me thinking, well, there's no real green Tara. It's just my mind. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It's like, no, there really is a green Tara because it is just your mind. And guess what? You're only here because you're just your mind at the same thing. There's an equality and kind of like a horizontal planing out of all this existence, which makes anything possible. So literally they have your back because they're right there with you. Okay. I mean, which is amazing. But when you go into the actual Mahamudra moment, like Mahamudra practice, where you're just meditating on your mind, technically they become part of the data, if you know what I'm saying. Like they become something you're just watching and letting go. So that's actually really important because, in other words, you're trying to see the emptiness even of them. Otherwise, if you're trying to remove them, it's kind of like, can you please be there for me and just watch over me? You're claiming they're inherently existing separate from you on some level, which is precisely what Mahamudra is trying to get rid of, if you see what I mean, right? Yep. Like what we're all one on the emptiness level. So the whole point is that we're all disappearing into emptiness here, Buddhas and us and everything else. But on a conventional level, when we all come back, we're all here as a family, right? And guess what? That's all happening simultaneously. Conventional ultimate level are the same thing, right? It just depends which the glass is half empty? Am I looking at the air part or the water part, like flipping between the two, right? So they're always there with your back. And if you have to take a moment and just ask for inspiration or blessing, you can. In other words, okay, my Mahamudra isn't going, I'm getting distracted. Let me take a moment. You know, it's like, okay, Buddhas, I need your blessing, inspiration here, just taking a bit of a break. Okay, going into it. But when I'm back into it, everything is seen as just, you know, thoughts, feelings, like in a Vipassana thing that I'm recognizing as such, and then letting go. Thoughts are self-liberating, even if they're beautiful thoughts, even if it's visions of Buddha, I let them go. I see them as just part of the mind. Like one of my teachers, amazing yogi, he said on higher levels of completion stage practice, when you're doing very, very advanced tantra and your winds are being purified, you will start having direct visions of Buddhas. And these are 100% 3D visions of Buddhas, but they're not real. They're fake. They're just like some kind of karmic feedback from your visualization. But the danger is that you're going to believe it. So this is why you have Mahamudra, is that, so he says literally, like you come home and you go in the kitchen, sit down, and then you look up and green tar is hovering above the stove with all green lights coming out of it. And you're like, oh my God. But then it's just like, this isn't real. This is like a dream. This isn't real. That's not her. The danger is, see how please, green tar, anoint me as the next great messiah of Nelson, BC. Lama Matthew is here to save the world. Like that's what you're going to do if you think that's real. Is you're going to start grasping at it and thinking you're something special. Oh, you're never going to believe. You see, I know I'm not listening to you, Rinpoche. Green tar appears to me directly giving me advice. Don't you tell me, Marshall, that I'm crazy, you know, like whatever, right? Like that's the danger. Whereas if you have Mahamudra, it's just like, okay, well, this is interesting. But in the end, it's just labeled by the mind. It's just a thought or an experience like everything else. I'm letting it go. We'll see what happens. And I'm going to tell my Lama, oh, guess what? Every time I go home, green tar is in the kitchen. Like, what do you think of that? But this is why it protects you from yourself, from all your superstitions and deluded ideas and stuff like that, right? So that you have to incorporate your refuge field within that zone or field of Mahamudra.
Okay,
right?
and that
like
is
when you're doing Mahamudra, like when you're not doing Mahamudra, you're sitting on the couch saying mantras or just making prayers or being like Bhakti Yoga devotional stuff. Like I'm visualizing my gurus, I love you, please help me be a better Buddhist, than all the way. But when you're in formal Mahamudra, the whole point, just like Zen, is it's just meditating on the mind. You don't say mantras, you don't visualize deities, you don't do yoga poses, whatever, you just sit. No, I mean, but people, you wouldn't believe what people tell me, all the kind of little chocolate sprinkles they like putting on top of this. It's supposed to be like bare, naked awareness, right? Just like in the Kagyu tradition, just like in Nyingma tradition, just like in Zen, you just sit like it's the end of the world, right? And whatever happens, you just, again, let it go. You're just breathing, watching the mind, silent watch. You're just like watching TV, whatever appears, or watching YouTube, one video loading in after another, you know, cats playing with the yarn, some guy falling off his bike. I mean, what TikTok stupid dance videos. The point is it just keeps rolling and you keep watching, right?
That's really helpful in terms of, in terms of my question, that is very helpful. And the other thing that'll happen at times is then I'll start narrating, okay, watch the mind like sky, you know, and again, they're kind of reminders, like, it's kind of a key phrase for me, mind like sky. It does help me, if that makes any sense at all. But those little bits of narration, and
they'll go, like I have it, like with my diluted mind, a lot of times when I'm doing Mahamudra, you have all that, and then I'll have, even, it just goes how diluted I am, like I'll even have music soundtracks. It's kind of like the Spotify ambient music, like you know, it's like you're at a spa, you know, and you're getting massage, woo, you hear all the like the nature sounds or the piano or whatever and stuff like that. But the whole point is that precisely that can't be outside the frame, right? It's in the frame.
So it's part of the frame. my
because technically what
anything.
Mahamudra is teaching you is there's no frame, right?
Right.
That's the lesson,
Yeah.
right?
And then I'll start grappling with that within the meditation, and then
Yeah.
just kind of, okay, just clouds in the sky.
Clouds in the sky.
And
so when anything looks real, the whole point is you fall back on these, again, flavors of emptiness. Like, but the most important one being the prasangika thing. Things are just labeled by the mind, just by words and concepts. That's me talking to myself. But there's no me, there's no self, there's no talking. Yeah, it's just like clouds. That's why like in Reiki, which I do, it's based on Japanese Buddhism. The Reiki symbols and the Japanese word they use, which I really like, is is clouds, because like Japanese Buddhism, everything's just like a cloud. All these mantras or symbols are like clouds, just like dreams, right? Virtualities, if you want to call them, right? Anyway, does that sound okay? Do you want anything else, or kind of finish on that, or what do you
that's
think?
very helpful for me.
Yeah. Okay. Good. No. Wonderful. So.
Yeah.
And Mike and Matthew, I would just like to say again, thank you for this. At one level, it is so complex and intense and exciting, and at another level, I just feel much more relaxed about what I'm actually doing. It's not only given me all of that part, but I just have it's intensified my faith.
Good.
And knowing that I'm going somewhere, and it's inevitable, and I just enjoy every moment of it.
Perfect. Working for you. So two things I'll pick up on. Nagarjuna says like true knowledge or gnosis or whatever is the quiescence of all perplexities. In other words, when your confusions stop and you're relaxed, that's when it's working. So it's the same thing in Mahamudra Dzogchen. It's like Namkhai no Rinpoche says, where there's tension, there is suffering, which is perfect. Where there is tension, there is suffering. Obvious. I mean, any physiotherapist will tell you that, or chiropractor, right? So where is there tension? Like Trempa Rinpoche says, the ego is tension. Anytime you're grasping, you got the closed fist. One of our teachers, Kanda Rinpoche, said, drowning people, as they're drowning, try to grab onto water. That should tell you everything. That's the ego grabbing onto your thoughts. If everything's just imputed by the mind, everything's impermanent, it's precise, you can't, but that's why we're suffering. So the first step in Mahamudra, as you see, is learning to relax. So the most important thing is philosophically is letting go of everything, even intellectually, that allows you to relax. So my favorite philosopher, Wittgenstein, who has the Prasangika view, he always said, once we sort it, the whole point is like showing the fly out of the bottle or untying the knot. Like the key is getting the point for him, just saying philosophy is just a confusion in how you're using words. You're getting confused with concepts and words. And once you see that all words is just how we use them every day, all these knots disappear. And he says, where does the knot go when you untie it? Right? So that's what we want, is just to relax, just to let go. Like in Zen, it's simple. You sit there and they just hit you when you're moving. But we're not doing that particular way of doing it. We're doing a little more intellectually here in the Gelugpa tradition, but it's the same thing. Because once we get in a tantra, all it is faith and devotion and visualization, right? Creative visualization that allows us to open up for things to happen. You have to be relaxed to do that. And you have to have no confusion or hangups to do that. That's the only way it'll work. So if that's happening to you right now, Marcia, that is a very, very good sign of progress. Just letting you know. Very impressed. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's just take a moment to dedicate. Thank you. This was an awesome conversation and sharing here. I learned a lot. I think it's amazing. And thank you very much for coming. So whatever we've done here today, let's dedicate this for the awakening of all sentient beings. Blessings of all holy beings, the truth of karma, the pure intention, may all of our dharma wishes be fulfilled. Okay, let me see you next time. I'll press stop here.